Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Passover. As befitting for Passover, let me begin with a question. With whom shall I spend my Passover Seder? Some might call that the fifth of the why is this night different of the Manish Tanakh questions from the Haggadah. After all, thanks to vaccines and a clear understanding of how to protect ourselves from the coronavirus, this Passover, especially the Seders, will certainly be different from last year's Passover Seders. And last year's Seders were most definitely different from every other previous Seder. But for me, the question is more akin to the high holiday prayers. And that prayer is Unatana Tokef, which asks the question, who will live and who will die? With whom shall I spend my Passover Seder is not about composing a guest list. It's not about the dilemma of spending time with parents or with in-laws. Not about staying close to home or traveling. Not about having some of the kids over or all of the kids over and the grandchildren over or whatever it might be. It's not about which hotel to choose. It is still about life and death. It is finally time to emerge from our isolation, the isolation of last year, and spend Passover, Pesach, the holiday of freedom with other people. And the answer is, it all depends. Vaccines have provided the world with a newfound freedom, but now it is up to us to determine how far to take that new freedom. In Israel, much of the decision-making is taken out of our hands, now in the hands of individuals. Rules and regulations are mandated by various ministries, the Office of the Prime Minister, his cabinet, and those infamous committees. Annoying, certainly, but the expectation is that these rules and regulations are the work of experts in the field. Police enforce the rules and fine violators. In the United States, there is more leeway. In place of ministries, there is the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. That, by the way, is centers. And in place of mandates, there are recommendations and gubernatorial orders, of course, the executive orders of each state's governors and the health department of each state with their own set of rules. According to the CDC, a person is considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after receiving the final dose of the vaccine. People in that category are then able to visit with other fully vaccinated people indoors without wearing their masks and staying 6 feet apart, by the way, and that minimum is 10 people. That makes, I believe, perfect sense. But upon closer inspection, what it really is saying, for Passover Seder purposes, is that those people who are over 65 years old, which is the golden number for vaccines in the United States, can share their Seder with other 65-year-olds. So much for spending Seder with children and grandchildren, or maybe not. Then the CDC adds that fully vaccinated people are also able to visit with unvaccinated people from one other household indoors without wearing masks or staying 6 feet apart, if everyone in the other household is at a low risk for severe disease. That's a quote. Who determines that? It's only natural that wishful thinking that we will persuade most people to determine or rationalize that people they most want to spend time with are at low risk for severe disease. We are, after all, only human. The internal debate is wrenching. The decisions are ours to make. The pandemic has upended our lives, but we are the lucky ones. We're still here, still alive, still healthy enough to wrestle with the dilemma this Passover presents. Let's not at this late date, try to end around the warnings, restrictions, and mandates that are being handed down. We've made it this far. Let us make it to next year. God willing, we will all cooperate. We will be able to enjoy Passover Seder with whomever we please, wherever we please. However you spend it, I hope it's a happy, healthy Passover. When greeting people instead of the customary next year in Jerusalem, this year we can say, next year at the Passover Seder. I've also been thinking about a phenomenon called pay to play. What is pay to play? Well, you should know it. It's when you contribute to a cause, whatever that cause might be, that is connected to a powerful person, and you contribute specifically with the intent of receiving access and influence from that person. You are paying in order to play. It's relatively common. The best exemplars of this form of philanthropy are actually Bill and Hillary Clinton. The Clinton family perfected this method by giving and by way of their foundation, their family foundation. But have you heard of pay to slay? It's not at all common. It's an invention of the Palestinian Authority. Pay to slay is what happens when the official Palestinian government officially pays Palestinian terrorists sitting in prison in Israel after they have been convicted for acts of terror they perpetrated against Israel and Israelis. The money is given to their families. The Palestinian Authority euphemistically calls this money a salary. We've just marked the 10th anniversary of the brutal terror murders of 5 members of the Fogel family. Ehud Fogel was 35 years old. His wife Ruth was 35 also. And their 3 children, 11-year-old Yoav, 4-year-old Elad, and baby Hadass, who was only 3 months old. They were butchered in their home in March of 2011. Remaining members of the Fogel family and extended friends and family marked the 10-year anniversary of this horrific loss with visits to the grave, lighting memorial candles. Israelis, those who knew the family and those who knew only of the tragedy, joined in their mourning. The Palestinian Authority remembered the Fogel family too. Their form of remembrance was they upped the salaries of the 2 murderers now sitting in prison. They each received a 50% raise in salary for murder. The Palestinian Authority works off a calculus. The terrorist salaries are based on the sentences that are handed down by the Israeli court. And if the terrorist against the Israelis does not live to be tried, convicted and imprisoned, if he or she dies while perpetrating their terror, the salary stipend goes to their family is higher than the salary awarded to living terrorists. What kind of society pays people to murder by rewarding the murderers and their families? We're not talking about the mafia. This is an official government policy recognized by other governments in the United States. That's strange. The PA takes millions of dollars in aid from around the world and turns around and gives it as a stimulus package to their murderers. Actually, it's often said that being a terrorist might be one of the best and highest paid jobs in the Palestinian Authority. You get paid, and you get paid on time. I will not honor these Palestinian terrorists by naming them. I know their names. But here are the specifics of their earnings. They each will now receive 6,000 Israeli shekels a month. In US dollars, that's $1,800. According to the Palestinian Media Watch, if they should live to age 80, they will each earn 6.5 million Israeli shekels. The sum is a whopping $2 million each. As an aside, both of these terrorists were sentenced to life in prison. But should they be released before their end of days, they will continue to receive their salaries afterwards. In the year 2020, the Palestinian Authority spent 512 million new Israeli shekels in terrorist salaries. That is equivalent to $159 million paid out for the pay to slay. It's an aid program. It stimulates development, education, democracy, peace. That's not what they're doing. Instead, they're funneling it to terrorists. Granted, nowadays, it's after the fact. Under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the aid money was handed out in advance, given directly to sponsor terrorist units and terror activities in advance of their being carried out, to plan them. So there's at least that. This entire scheme is simply repulsive. It's immoral and unethical, and it is by no means a dirty little secret within the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian leadership is proud of this program. They tout it as a recruiting tool for new terrorists. Remember the word terrorists. It's the title we attribute to those who, in cold blood, murder innocents. The PA refers to them as fighters, soldiers, and heroes. And in death, the PA refers to the monsters as martyrs. They treat it as an early retirement plan. Leaders understand the impact and incentive of stimuli. They have agenda, and they give money away. It's not because they're generous. Tax credits are the ideal example. The government wants to stimulate charitable contributions, so they establish a system that allows for the taxpayer to turn a charitable gift into a tax credit. Give more charity, pay less taxes. But in pay to slay, it's not a charity. It's not about caring about citizens. It's about hating your neighbors. It's about killing your enemy. It's about wiping them off the face of the earth. Pay to slay has to be stopped. Golda Meir, the first and so far the only female Prime Minister of Israel, she spoke in 1957 at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. She put it this way: peace will come when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us. We're still waiting. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the Turkish pro-government newspaper called the Daily Al-Sabah. Al-Sabah in Arabic and in Turkish means the morning. So this is the daily morning newspaper in Turkey, and the Daily Al-Sabah gives excellent insight into the Turkish President Erdogan's perspective and motivation and philosophy. It's his official arm in English. It explains his point of view, not just of the past actions, but policies, and it helps in predicting Erdogan's future moves. This column was written by Harrington Duran, and it's entitled Repositioning a Middle East, a Rational View. It was published on March 15th, 2021. Duran explains that in the Middle East, things are changing and leaders are reevaluating events and making important decisions. This is how he begins. The Middle East is experiencing an extraordinary amount of activity. On the 10th anniversary of the Arab revolts, a series of developments and debates are intertwined. In the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey and Egypt are watching each other's movements as Tel Aviv sends warm messages to Ankara. The foreign ministers of Russia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have just met to exchange views on Syria. At the same time, there's an uptick in attacks by Iranian-backed groups against the United States in Iraq, which the Pope also just visited. Meanwhile, Russia is mounting pressure on Idlib and Jarabos as Saudi Arabia is coming under attack from Yemen, fueling concerns in the Iranian media that Turkey and Riyadh may work together there. All these things indicate that global and regional powers are taking stock of their rivalries, conflicts, and areas of cooperation. Now Duran explains that under President Joe Biden, the United States is not likely to change direction in the Middle East policy at all. He explains, the Biden administration, whose focus is to compete with China, is not expected to take radical steps in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, the U.S. is unlikely to reach an agreement with the Iranians since Washington and Tehran are also in a tug-of-war over Iraq. The Democrats, too, support the Abraham Accords that Israel concluded with Arab states under the former President Donald Trump's watch. Finally, Russia is looking for ways to exploit any power vacuum that may emerge in the Middle East during the Biden presidency. No sign of partial change in Washington's Middle East policy fully accounts for the heightened level of activity in the region. Regional players feel compelled to revisit their post-Arab Spring policy choices, as well as their alliances and rules of engagement, which the Trump administration put to the test. Duran concludes by giving advice to the Saudis and the Egyptians. Essentially, he advises them to be careful because they are far weaker than they think. This piece, by the way, is an essential indicator of where Turkey views itself and the others in the Middle East. Next up is a column from the Eurasia Review. It's authored by Baria Alamoudun, and she's an award-winning journalist and broadcaster in the Middle East. She's the editor of Media Services Syndicate and has interviewed numerous heads of states from around the world. The column is entitled, Putin Considers Slamming the Door on Iran and Opening Window for Israel. The op-ed was published on February 21st, 2021. There is a salient section in this column, and that is what I want to present to you today. It reads, a remarkable meeting occurred in January between Syrian and Israeli officials at the Russian base near Latakia in western Syria. It appears to have been precipitated by Israeli concerns about the increasing sophistication of high-precision Iranian missiles and drones in Tehran's satellite states. Israel wanted to convey the message to Tehran that an Iranian military presence in Syria would never be permitted. Perhaps more remarkable than the meeting itself was the extensive pressure exerted by the Russians to force Damascus to participate, including temporarily suspending fuel supplies. Did you catch the importance of that last sentence? The rest of the column is irrelevant, but this was critical. What happened between Israel and Syria it happened because of the Russians. It was all under Russian auspices. That's huge. That's significant. Iran is clearly getting in the way. That's how Russia sees the Middle East right now. And the Kremlin also sees that Israel is solving problems. Russia, above everything else, is practical at all ends. They're not ideological, but simply practical. And Israel is running its defense and foreign policy in terms that Russia understands, in terms that Russia appreciates. This is insight which is essential. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 4 cartoons today. These cartoons are simply funny. They poke fun at us. We live in a very strange world in very strange times, and never would I have predicted that the issues we confront today would ever be front and center in our lives. Never would I have predicted this. The first cartoon depicts an alien from outer space, preparing to meet Earthlings for the first time. Before the alien steps out of the capsule, another alien hands him a helmet. This helmet looks like the helmet from Sparta 2,000 years ago. The alien says, "When you first make contact with the Earthlings, wear this helmet. Trust me, it'll be hilarious." This is truly a comment on stepping back to the future. We live in a very confusing time. This next meme is a play on the idea of the glass is half full. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Good question, but the author of the meme has a third option. The meme reads, "My therapist set a half a glass of water in front of me. He asked if I was an optimist or a pessimist. So I drank the water and I told him I was a problem solver." In parentheses, the memist writes, "Make mine a Chardonnay." Third up is a play on communism, using the original TV show Star Trek. Remember Star Trek, the TV show? It was an attempt to unite the world, to bring everyone together in order to fight evil from outside Earth. Sulu, the Asian, asked Chekhov, the Russian, "Do you want to hear a funny communism joke?" Chekhov responds, "Communism jokes aren't funny unless everyone gets them." That's hilarious. Last up is another cartoon about an alien. This alien arrives on Earth and shows up with a sign to seeing his first Earthlings. The sign reads, "Take me to your leader." The Earthling says, "You've sort of come at a bad time." No need to say anything else about this. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. I have in the past spoken about the upcoming elections in Iran that are slated to take place on June 18th. Now we are hearing from experts explaining that because of those elections, the window the United States has come to an agreement with Iran before the election is about 10 weeks. That's all, just 10 weeks. After the election, they explain, the new president will almost certainly be more conservative than Rouhani, the current president, they will not welcome the agreement. That entire analysis is just wrong. Who was to say that after an agreement is cobbled together between the United States and Iran, signed with the current government of Iran, that within the next 10 weeks, the incoming government will not rip it up and shred it into shreds, if for no other reason than to prove that they do not support the relations with the United States and with the West? This is Iran we are dealing with. That's important to recognize. Stevie Wonder will be awarded the Wolf Prize from Israel. As always, the award was announced by the Israeli President Ruvi Rivlin. The Wolf Prize is awarded to artists and scientists. It's quite impressive. Not surprisingly, Roger Waters, a blatant and outspoken hater of the Jewish state, is asking Stevie Wonder to reject the prize. Waters is a singer, songwriter, musician, and composer. He's also a rabid supporter of BDS, and he never misses an opportunity to attack Israel or to use his fame and music popularity to force others to boycott Israel. Waters has reached out to just about every single performer scheduled to come to Israel. He publicly calls out and calls them and uses Twitter to embarrass them. Thus far, Waters' campaign has had only a very limited success, and Stevie Wonder is still scheduled to accept the award. There was an explosion outside the Israeli embassy in New Delhi, India, this past January. Until now, it was thought that ISIS, which claimed responsibility in the aftermath of the explosion, had planned and executed the terror attack. But India has now concluded that Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, were behind the terror attack which detonated by remote control. A note written in English was found nearby the site of the attack. Very poor English, mind you. It turns out that the note was deliberate and an attempt to mislead investigators. According to the note, the attack was to avenge the deaths of several martyrs. Martyrs listed on the note were Qasem Soleimani, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander who was killed in January 2020. The United States, in a drone strike, killed him. Abu Mahdi al-Mohandas, a top Iraqi militia commander who was killed alongside Soleimani, and Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the architect of Iran's nuclear program, killed in November 2020, an attack that Tehran has blamed on Israel. The note also said and warned that the attackers are watching and can strike at any time. An Israeli group named Anshe Emet, the People of Truth, have taken the State of Israel to The Hague, also known as the ICC or the International Criminal Court. Strange. This group alleges that Israel is forcing citizens to vaccinate, and that forcing them to vaccinate is a form of abuse. They also assert that people have died from the vaccine. Their biggest argument, though, is that the reaction to the shot is a form of abuse, that people have reactions. In reality, the numbers tell a very different story. Only 0.25% of those in Israel who received the Pfizer vaccine had any significant reaction at all. That number is practically zero. The case is absurd. The group and their decision to bring the case to The Hague takes anti-vaxxers to a whole new level, and I dare to say a ridiculous level. A hacker group successfully attacked Israeli finance company. Now they're demanding ransom of 1.9 million shekel. That's about $570,000. Actually, they want it through bitcoins. The group is called the Black Shadow. The company they attacked is called KLS. It's a finance company that handles car payments. The Black Shadow has begun to release the company's private information on the web. They also deleted a significant amount of data. This is not the first time the Black Shadow has cyber attacked an Israeli company. Last December, just a few months ago, they successfully attacked Israeli insurance company called Sherbet. Following that attack, the hacker group demanded and received 200 bitcoins, which equaled 3.8 million Israeli dollars. $3.8 million. KLS, though, has refused to pay. They told Black Shadow that they will not pay the ransom. A team of archaeologists from Norway and France have discovered and unearthed a compound consisting of 6 churches and many isolation chambers. The remains are from the 5th century. The finds were located in the western desert of Egypt. This dig further supports the idea that monastic life was commonplace in religious Christian life. They found inscriptions, they found buildings that were cut into the bedrock. They discovered that basalt stone was also used, as well as mud brick was used for the building. Archaeological finds like this are very helpful in understanding of early Christian society. Just 18 months ago, the water line in the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, was so dangerously low that it was below the bottom red line. It was so low that pumping from Israel's only freshwater lake was restricted to the bare minimum and nearly stopped. When the water level reaches the bottom red line, pumping must be restricted if not stopped. Today, the Sea of Galilee is almost at full capacity. Israel is no longer in the crisis for fresh water. The Sea of Galilee was filled due to an unusual amount of rain and snow over the winter months. If the water rises just a little more, the National Water Authority will open a dam and release the water from the lake into the Jordan River. That dam is right next to Degania, the kibbutz there. This is done in order to prevent flooding. Imagine, 6 months ago, water in Israel was at a dangerous low. Today, it is so high, Israel can afford to siphon it off. Israel needs water. For decades, Israelis have been taught about the importance of water conservation. Water is so important for productive life, and Israel has so many plans to ensure that the country continues to have fresh water. Rain, of course, is not a part of the plan, but thankfully this year, it arrived in the nick of time. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We just spoke about archaeology. And archaeology is a door that, when opened, helps us understand history. In Israel, practically everywhere you dig, you discover ancient ruins. That's hardly an exaggeration. The entire country knows and respects that truth and loves archaeology. Like it's in the newspaper all the time. In order to build a road, the government must first create what is called a salvage dig. Archaeologists dig to see what was under the ground where the road is going to be built. They draw images, they photograph their findings. Sometimes the path of the road is altered. Sometimes an observation area above the road is built in order to show the dig. And sometimes the salvage dig is covered back up and they build the road right where it's supposed to be. Salvage digs have accidentally discovered remarkable finds in Israel. The third wall around the ancient city of Jerusalem was accidentally found while digging before paving a road around Jerusalem. No one ever thought to dig there before to find the third wall. We knew there was a third wall, we just didn't know where it was. And then poof, it was found. For Israelis, archaeology is not just an element that proves Jewish history. It gives power and emotion and resonance to history. Archaeology allows us to touch Herod's temple with our own hands. Because of archaeology, we can walk where Abraham walked. Archaeology connects us to the past. And that is a powerful and meaningful experience. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.